Deep within the mist-shrouded jungles of Central Africa lies a village untouched by time. Ndoki, a name whispered with reverence and fear, hides secrets buried for generations. They honor the spirits of their ancestors and obey taboos older than the language they speak. But among them was one secret too terrifying to name, until the day it revealed itself. He wasn't feared because of his strength, or his strange eyes that burned like fire. No, they feared what he carried between his legs, something alive, something not human. This is not just a legend. This is a reckoning. Stay with us to the end, because once you know the truth, you'll never forget it. The village of Ndoki sat beneath the endless canopy of the Ituri rainforest, a sacred place, where spirits roamed freely and traditions bound every soul. No outsiders were welcome. No questions about the past were tolerated. And above all, no one spoke of the Shadow Mother. That name, only whispered during storms, referred to a woman who had once given birth to something unnatural. A child with no known father. A child not fully human. But no one dared say more. On a moonless night, as thunder shattered the skies and rain flooded the forest floor, a cry pierced the air from the last hut in the village. Bali, the village healer and spirit medium, had given birth alone. No man had ever courted her. No elder recalled her being pregnant. Yet a boy had come into the world. She named him Luzendo, meaning born of the darkness. From the moment he could walk, it was clear Luzendo was not like the others. He never got sick. He could see in total darkness. He spoke in strange tongues during his sleep, and the serpents of the forest followed him. People began to whisper that he was the son of the serpent. Bali denied it. He is a child like any other, she insisted. But the villagers were not convinced. When Luzendo turned 13, things took a darker turn. Giant black pythons began slithering into the village, a species unseen for generations. They circled Bali's hut, sat outside it for days, watching, waiting, but they never attacked anyone. When Luzendo stepped outside, the snakes bowed their heads as if greeting a king. That same year, he was called to participate in the initiation ritual, a sacred rite of passage where boys must bathe in the holy river, stripped of clothing to be purified by the ancestors. Luzendo removed his loincloth, and what the villagers saw broke the silence of centuries. Between his legs was no ordinary manhood. It was a living black serpent, thick and coiled, its tongue flickering, its eyes glowing faintly. It hissed, not in fear but in power. The elders gasped. Children screamed. Women cried. Warriors stumbled backwards. Even the high priest dropped his staff. Bali said nothing. She simply closed her eyes, as if she had always known this day would come. That night, the Council of Ancestors met beneath the sacred baobab tree. The elders, wrapped in masks and tradition, opened an ancient scroll written not with ink, but with blood and elephant hide. Read. When the serpent sun reveals himself beneath the river moon, 3 seasons shall pass before the darkness returns. He who bears the snake shall open the gate. No one knew what the prophecy truly meant, but all knew it foretold disaster. By unanimous decree, Luzendo was banished, stripped of his name, forbidden to speak it again. He was given nothing but a cloth to cover himself, a sharp blade, and a necklace carved from serpent fang, a gift from Bali, who placed it in his hands with trembling fingers. She did not follow him. From that night onward, she never spoke again. Luzendo vanished into the eastern jungle, the forbidden forest, where even ancestors feared to tread. No one dared to follow. The sun blazed mercilessly over the ochre sands of the Dambo region. As the villagers of Nduji carried on with their daily lives, a whisper had started to grow into a murmur, and a murmur into full-throated gossip. Word had spread he had returned, the boy who vanished, the one cursed by the gods, and with him came the shadow of something unnatural. Batu, now grown into a man hardened by the desert winds and distant lands, stood tall, his skin darker from years under foreign suns, his eyes deeper, holding storms few could understand. The elders saw him and exchanged glances of concern. Mothers called their children in early, and even the dogs lowered their heads when he passed. He was home but not welcome. The small hut of Elder Zibando stood at the village's edge, draped in the talismans of protection. Bada walked in with heavy steps, kneeling low out of habit, though respect no longer flowed naturally between them. "You should not have returned," Zibando croaked without turning from the fire. "Not with it still inside you." Bada clenched his jaw. "I didn't come back for peace. I came for truth." Zibando sighed, finally facing the man. His eyes, clouded with age, still pierced like spears. "The truth will tear this place apart," the elder warned. "Just as your mother once did." The name struck like a whip. Bada's mother had died in whispers and secrets. They said she made a pact. Others said she bore a child not entirely human. No one had ever told Bada the whole truth. And now he was determined to tear it from the village's heart, even if it bled. As Bada moved through the village, strange things began to happen. A child, playing near the riverbank, saw a shadow slither under the water, long, thick, silent. He screamed, claiming a snake with a man's face stared back at him. Goats were found strangled in their pens, their bodies twisted unnaturally. The villagers gathered at night, clutching charms and praying under their breath. And then came the dreams. One by one, villagers began seeing the same vision. Batu standing over them, his body covered in golden scales, eyes glowing green, whispering in a tongue no one could understand. Zibando knew what was happening. The bond that Batu carried it was awakening. On the third night after his return, Batu walked alone to the cliffs beyond the village. There, under the light of a blood-red moon, he removed his cloak and let the wind hit his bare skin. Then he spoke. "I know you're still there," he said aloud. A hiss responded, soft and silken, curling around his mind like smoke. "Always." From his spine, a bulge rose, pulsing like a heartbeat. Batu cried out in pain as golden scales pushed through his skin, and the serpent coiled free from his flesh, a creature both part of him and separate. It was beautiful and monstrous. Its eyes mirrored Batu's, but colder, ancient. "You promised me control," Batu growled. "And you promised me freedom," the serpent replied. "Our time has come." Batu fell to his knees, panting as the snake melted back into his spine, disappearing beneath skin that still shimmered with a faint, unnatural sheen. In the days that followed, Batu's presence became more pronounced. He helped fix roofs, hunted with the young men, and taught the children strange songs from faraway lands. And then he met her again, Naima. She was no longer the girl with whom he had once danced under moonlight. She was now the village herbalist, wise, strong, and suspicious. "You smell of secrets," she told him one afternoon as he handed her a bundle of rare herbs. "And you smell of truth," he replied. They did not touch. Not yet. But the air between them tightened, as if the land itself knew that something old and unfinished was stirring. Despite their fear, the village elders held a meeting beneath the baobab of spirits. Batu was summoned. Zibando stood before the fire and raised a staff carved with the faces of the old gods. "You walk in two skins, Batu," he declared. "And we know now what sleeps inside you. We cannot allow the curse of Kenyoka to awaken." Gasps echoed through the crowd. The name was ancient, forbidden. Batu stood his ground. "Then tell me what it means." Zibando's face hardened. "Your mother was the last vessel. A priestess who dared bind herself with the guardian of the threshold. She gave birth to a child not meant to exist." "The guardian?" Batu repeated. "A serpent god, keeper of the in-between, chose you. Or perhaps you chose it in the womb. Either way, you are its son and its prison." That night, Batu wandered to the edge of the sacred forest, the serpent whispering again in his mind. "They will never accept you. Let me out. Let me free. We can leave this place and rule far beyond." But Batu didn't answer. Not yet. He knew something was coming. He could feel it in his bones and the serpent's coils tightening with anticipation. It wasn't just about him anymore. Something darker stirred beneath the earth, and soon, the village would be at its mercy. And perhaps, he was the only one who could stop it. Or unleash it. The night skies over Nduji began to change. What was once a blanket of calm stars became streaked with crimson auroras and flashes of lightning without thunder. The elders muttered of omens, of ancient contracts broken. But only one man knew the truth, that something inside him had stirred the veil between worlds. And it was no longer content to sleep. It began with tremors. At first small, felt only in the soles of the feet. But soon even the huts shook. The goats refused to feed. Birds took flight and never returned. And then, from the old burial hills beyond the village, something clawed its way to the surface. A strange pit, deep and spiraled like a coiled serpent, yawned open in the earth. Smoke rose from it, thick and black, and at night it glowed red like breath from a sleeping beast. Bada stood at the edge of it, alone, the serpent inside him thrumming like a drum. "He is waking," the voice hissed in his head. "Who?" "The one your mother chained. The true god of the between. I was only the guardian. But you are his vessel." Bada backed away. He wasn't ready. But fate didn't care. Elder Zabando had never opened the old scrolls, not even when his wife died, or when the plague swept through the crops. But now, in the sacred hut guarded by bones of lions and marked with chalk symbols, he unrolled the forbidden parchment, the scroll of Ndengoro. It spoke of a time before memory, when the gods walked with men, and one among them, Kenyoka, the serpent between worlds, grew jealous of life. He sought to twist creation, blend death with birth, chaos with order. And he found humans willing to host him, sorcerers, witches, kings. But the gods punished him. They chained him between realms, in the space where dreams and nightmares are born. Only once had he almost returned, through a priestess named Meroa, Bada's mother. And now, through her son, the door was opening again. Meanwhile, Naima wandered into the sacred forest, guided by visions that visited her each night. She saw Bada bathed in fire, wrapped in a serpent's coil, standing over the village with his arms outstretched, and everyone bowing. She didn't know whether to fear him or save him. In the forest, she met a woman with skin like tree bark and eyes glowing white. "I am Kazi," the woman said. "Once I stood where you stand, chosen to either love the vessel or kill him." "What happened?" Naima asked. "I chose wrong." Naima fell to her knees. "What must I do?" Kazi handed her a vial of ash-black liquid. "When the moment comes, you must decide, poison him or protect him." 3 nights later, the festival of Kifungo, the binding, was to take place. The villagers hoped the ancient dances and chants would calm the spirits and close the pit in the hills. Badu, standing at the edge of the celebration, felt the serpent twist in his spine. Then, with no warning, he dropped to his knees, screaming. Golden scales burst from his arms. His veins pulsed green. His eyes lit up like twin moons. And from his back, the serpent, larger now, tore free, hissing into the night sky. The drums stopped. Children cried. Elders fell to the ground, weeping. Zabando shouted, "It has begun. He is becoming the key." Naima ran to Batu, her hand trembling around the vial hidden beneath her robes. But she couldn't do it. Not yet. That night, Bata did not sleep. His body lay still, but his spirit drifted into the realm of Nwambu, the space between waking and death. There he saw a throne made of bones and stars. And on it sat Kenyoka. He was not a serpent. Not fully. He was shifting shadows, faces of dead gods, wings made of ash. And he smiled with too many teeth. "You have done well, my son," the god said. "But you must choose, will you be my prison, or my prophet?" Bata tried to speak, but his tongue turned to sand. Kenyoka rose and touched his forehead. Suddenly Bata saw the future, villages burning, rivers drying, his face painted on temples, songs sung in his name. and Naima, kneeling before him, weeping. When he awoke, he was screaming. Back in the village, a council was called. Zibando stood before the flame. We cannot kill Bado. If we do, the god will possess another. But if we do nothing, Kenyoka will return. An old hunter named Muniru stepped forward. Then we must exile him. Send him to the Black Lands. Let the desert swallow him. Naima stood. No, there is still a man inside him. I have seen it. Zibando turned to her. Then you must go with him. Watch him. And if the god rises. He handed her a curved dagger etched with runes. Naima nodded, tears in her eyes. At dawn, Bada was bound in copper chains, only symbolic, for no rope could hold him now. He walked into the desert with Naima at his side. The village watched in silence. None cheered, none wept, but all felt the same fear. Would he return? And if he did, would it be as a man or a god? The sun over the Black Lands was unlike any other. It did not rise, it burned. It didn't bring life, it devoured it. As Batu and Naima crossed the threshold from the red-soiled savannas into that lifeless expanse, the ground turned to cracked obsidian, and even the wind whispered like it was afraid to speak too loudly. Their exile had begun. But deep in the dunes, the past was waiting, and it hadn't forgotten Batu. Naima had always believed the desert was just emptiness. But the Black Lands weren't barren, they were alive. Twisted trees made of stone leaned like they were listening. Bones of giant beasts jutted from dunes like shipwrecks in a frozen sea. And the sky was always gray even when the stars shone. Bada barely spoke. His steps were slow but steady, like something else was guiding him. At night, when he slept, he trembled. And once, Naima woke to find him hovering inches above the sand, glowing faintly, whispering in a language she didn't understand. She knew the time was near. The god inside was growing stronger. But her heart still belonged to the man. On the fourth day they found her. A little girl, no more than 6, sitting alone beside a broken obelisk carved with snake sigils. Her eyes were white, her skin cracked like baked clay. Yet when she spoke, her voice was calm, even sweet. Hello, Badu. You came. Bada froze. Who are you? The girl smiled. I am Tanda. I was the first. Before your mother. Before the chain. I opened the gate and burned for it. Naima stepped forward. You're a ghost. Yes, the girl said. But I remember pain. I remember fire. I remember the god whispering promises. Bada knelt before her. Why are you here? To warn you, and to offer you a gift. She reached into her chest literally and pulled out a small black orb pulsing red. This is the memory seed. If you swallow it, you will remember who you were before the serpent, before the darkness. Bada looked at Naima. She shook her head. Don't trust her. But the girl's eyes were so sad. Bada swallowed the seed, and the visions came like a flood. He saw himself not as Batu, but as Mwenzi, a child of the Sun tribe, born under a total eclipse. He saw his mother smile at him, saw his father, a warrior priest, slain by a creature with golden fangs. He saw Kenyoka approach him in the dream world when he was just a boy, promising him the power to protect those he loved. He accepted. That's when it all began. He was never chosen. He chose. And now the god merely wanted repayment. The next day they entered a crater surrounded by black stone pillars. At the center stood a man tall, wrapped in royal robes, with a crown made of bones and a cloak of scorpion shells. I am Karakan, king of the Forsaken, he said. His eyes locked on Badu. You carry the Great One inside. I once tried to do the same. But my flesh rejected him. It drove me mad. Now I rule over those who failed. He raised his hand, and hundreds of figures rose from the sands, men, women, children, all bearing marks of possession, all twisted, silent, empty-eyed. Naima clutched her blade. Karakan continued, You will join us soon unless you can master the balance. Badu asked, What is the balance? The art of holding the god without becoming him. Karakan drew 2 lines in the sand, one white, one black. Walk the line between them, or vanish like the rest. That night, Bada was taken into a stone circle where 2 fires burned, one bright blue, the other deep crimson. Karakan stood between them. You must choose, he said. Enter the blue to seal the god away, bury him forever. But you will lose all his power, even your life may fail. Or enter the red. Embrace Kenyoko fully. Become his prophet, his avatar. And never be human again. Naima shouted, there must be another way. Karakan laughed. There always is. But it is the path no one survives. Bada looked at the fires. And then, he walked between them. Straight down the middle. The flames licked at him, tore at him, screamed at him. But he kept walking. And when he emerged, the serpent inside him was silent. Not gone, but listening. Tanda returned that night, weaker than before. Her skin was flaking, her glow dimming. You passed the balance, she said. But the god will test you again. You will need me for what comes next. She raised her hands and a small silver dagger floated between them. This blade is made from the bones of the first guardian. It can cut gods, but to activate it, it needs a soul. Naima stepped forward. No, don't. But Tanda smiled. My soul is already lost. With that, she pressed her hand to the dagger. Light exploded, and Tanda vanished, leaving behind the blade now glowing with divine fire. Naima picked it up, tears running down her face. I'll make it count, she whispered. On the 10th day they arrived at the ancient site known only in whispers. Milu Pasha, the Pillars of the East, said to be the first doorway ever carved between worlds. Now it was crumbled, buried in half sand, half blood. But Bada felt it. The god inside stirred. We are near, it hissed. The gateway awaits, and your mother still lingers beyond it. Naima turned sharply. What did he say? Bada's voice was low, hollow. My mother is not dead. Naima's eyes widened, because behind the crumbled ruins, a shadow moved. A woman, wearing a serpent's crown. They said she was dead, but the dead don't wear crowns, and they don't call your name in the voice of your childhood. She stepped into the light slowly, and time itself seemed to shudder. Her eyes were black voids, but her skin bore the familiar bronze hue of Bada's own. Her hair flowed like obsidian waves, and on her head sat a serpent crown, its eyes still blinking with unnatural life. Bada froze. Mama? The woman smiled, but there was sorrow in it. My son. My beautiful, cursed son. Naima raised the divine dagger, heart pounding. Step back, Bada. That's not your mother. That's a host. But Bada couldn't move. His knees buckled. He fell. Because deep within his soul, the god Kenyoka stirred not with anger, but with reverence. She is the first gate, it whispered. The mother of the bond. The one who made me. Her name was once Aziina, a healer, a priestess, and the first woman to ever strike a pact with the gods of the underworld, not to summon power for herself, but to protect her unborn child. That child was Bada. She had entered the Temple of Fangs, drank the venom of time, and bargained with a god whose name hadn't been spoken in 10,000 years. I didn't do it to curse you, she said, kneeling beside Bada. I did it so you could live. But the power had grown beyond her. The pact consumed her. She became one with the god's echo and was sealed away by the sun priests who feared what she had become. Until now. Now her son stood before her carrying the same god within. Come with me, she said, extending a hand. We can rewrite the world, you and I. We can end war, end pain. We'll become more than flesh, more than kings. The god chose us. Let us finish what I started. Bada's hands trembled. His mind was a storm. Naima stepped between them. You said you did it to protect him, she spat. But now you want to use him. Aziina turned her gaze to Naima. You are brave, little lioness, but you don't understand. He was never meant to stay human. To prove his loyalty, Aziina set a test. Before them rose 3 shadowy figures, each wearing a mask made of human skin. They are the sole judges, Aziina explained. They will drag you into the river of memory. If you survive the trial, you will gain the serpent's gift. If you fail. She didn't finish the sentence. Bada stepped forward. Naima grabbed his arm. Don't do this. He looked into her eyes. I need to know who I am. The figures opened their mouths and Bada was pulled into darkness. The river was made of blood and stars. It didn't flow, it shivered. Bada stood at its edge and the judges behind him whispered, 3 truths must you face. 1 from your past. 1 from your soul. 1 from your fate. First truth, the past. He saw his village burning. He saw warriors with serpent tattoos slaughtering his people. And in the shadows, he saw himself older wearing the same tattoo. He had been one of them. He had returned years later possessed. And the god had used his hands to destroy all he once loved. He screamed and the river hissed. Second truth, the soul. He stood before a mirror and in it saw himself as Kenyoka towering, draped in bones, his eyes voids of chaos. They were not separate. They had merged long ago. He was not a host. He was the vessel. Third truth, the fate. He saw the future Naima, dead at his feet. The world in flames. The god laughing. But then a single thread of gold in the vision, Naima, holding the divine dagger, choosing to strike or to spare. And that choice would decide everything. Bada fell from the vision, gasping. Naima caught him. His eyes were no longer human. They shimmered like liquid onyx. But he was still there. I know now, he whispered, what I must become. Aziina approached, smiling. You passed. Now take the mantle. Become the Serpent King. But Bada looked at her and for the first time saw not a queen, but a prisoner. No, he said. I won't repeat your curse. Her face twisted. You ungrateful wretch. I sacrificed my soul for you. And I thank you, he whispered. But I won't lose mine. She screamed and the sky cracked. Sand lifted into the air, forming beasts of stone and bone. Naima pulled the dagger. Bada stood beside her. And together they faced the storm. It was not a battle, it was a war song. Badu unleashed the serpent within, striking with power born from forgotten gods. Naima danced between monsters, her blade singing fire and grief. Aziina wept as she fought. You could have been divine, she cried. I'd rather be human, Bada roared. With one final charge, Naima leapt high, drove the dagger into Aziina's heart. What? Silence. And the crown fell. Bada knelt beside her. She was no longer possessed, just tired. She touched his cheek. I loved you. Always. I know. She turned to dust, and the serpent inside Bada wept. They thought gods were born in fire and fury, but the oldest ones? They were born in silence and betrayal. When the dust of Aziina's defeat settled, the ancient temple revealed its deepest secret. A tunnel of ivory walls formed from polished bones, inscriptions that whispered in forgotten tongues. Naima traced her fingers across a carved glyph. It's a map, she murmured. A path to where it all began. Bada stood silently, the serpent inside him listening. Not speaking, listening. That silence was worse than any roar. The god is waiting, Bada said. It wants me to go deeper. And so they descended into the hollow belly of the underworld, where myths were born and gods remembered their pain. They walked for days, through rivers of stone where voices echoed backward, through gardens where time grew like thorns. Naima once aged a full year in a breath before Bada pulled her out. They passed statues of gods no one worshipped anymore, heads severed, chests shattered. Some bore familiar features, including Badu's. What is this place? Naima whispered. Bada replied, this is where gods die. At the lowest depth they found it, a circular chamber no larger than a hut, filled with 1,000 strands of golden thread, each thread pulsing softly, floating without touch. In the center, a cradle of black stone, and in it, a heart, still beating, still alive. Naima stepped back. Bata fell to his knees. "It's his heart," he said. "Kenyoka's first heart. The one that was ripped out when he was just a child." And the heart spoke, not in words, but in memories. Batu and Naima were pulled into a vision not of war or glory but of a boy, alone in a sacred village once called Italo. He had no name, no family. He was born during an eclipse, and the village elders whispered that he would bring ruin, so they fed him to the mountain god. But he did not die. He survived, and when he returned, the mountain followed him. He was no longer a child. He was something else, a vessel of rage, a mirror of what had been done to him. He tore down Italo stone by stone. He made them bow, but the loneliness remained. So he created followers, beasts, shadows, echoes. And then he created a bloodline. Bata was the last of it, the final echo, the one who would either forgive what had been done or repeat it on a cosmic scale. Naima emerged from the vision in tears. "He wasn't a god," she whispered. "He was just a hurt child." Bata stood in silence. The cradle pulsed with warmth. The heart called to him. "If I touch it," Bata said, "I'll become what he was. But if you do," Naima said, "you might never return." He looked at her, then at the heart, and slowly reached out his hand. When Bata touched the heart, it did not consume him, it embraced him. The god inside him didn't roar. It wept. 1,000 memories poured into his soul. Wars fought for vengeance, not glory. Kingdoms burned to hide pain. Followers betrayed. Lovers lost. And one memory above all, a golden thread cut too soon. That thread was his mother, Izina. She had once tried to heal Kenyoka, not just bond with him. But the god in his rage had refused. Now Bata was given that chance. The heart dissolved into his hand. He felt stronger, but also lighter. He turned to Naima, eyes filled with something new. "I don't think I'm cursed anymore," he said. "I think I've inherited his burden." "Then what now?" she asked. He looked up at the cavern above. "I climb. We go back to the surface. I still have a kingdom to reclaim." As they ascended, the chamber behind them collapsed. No one else would find that place again. But Bata carried it now in his blood, in his breath, in his bones. The serpent god no longer raged, but it did watch, and it waited, because though Bata had chosen to heal, the world above still believed in the old tales, still feared the serpent, and that fear would soon spark war. When they returned to the surface, the world had changed. Skies red, drums in the distance. Scouts from the Sun Priests had found the ruins and declared Batu a heretic. A demon returned. Bounties were posted. Villages burned. A throne sat empty, but not for long. Naima drew her blade. Bata looked to the east, and in the far distance, beyond jungle and ash, a crown waited. They feared the serpent would devour the sun. But what if the sun was the beast all along? By the time Batu and Naima returned to the highlands of Nyoto, the world had changed. Smoke rose in the distance. Villages once loyal to Batu's bloodline now flew the banners of the Sun Priests, a crimson eye over a burning halo. And the people? Terrified. "Have they already turned against me?" Batu asked. Naima's eyes narrowed. They never had a choice. A herald passed through the towns. "The serpent man has returned. The one whose manhood is a snake. He carries the blood of the dark god Kenyoka. He must be destroyed before the eclipse." And just like that, the stage was set. Bata didn't return to a kingdom. He returned to a battlefield. Before striking back, Bata needed answers. Naima led him to a hidden mountain shrine where an old seer, known only as Nkasi, lived in solitude. The oracle was blind, but when she touched Bata's face, she screamed. "You carry two souls?" she gasped. "But only one shadow." "What does that mean?" Badu asked. It means you can become a god, or a curse with a crown. Then she gave him a warning. The sun priests do not serve the light. They serve the fire beneath it, the one even Kenyoka feared. A name was whispered older than myth, Ubundwa, the sleeper under flame. And suddenly Badu understood, the war wasn't about him. It was about keeping something asleep. Badu and Naima headed for the sacred city of Kaloma, where the throne awaited, but halfway through the canyon pass of Ember Ridge, they were surrounded. Sun Priest assassins, masked, silent, deadly. They carried blades of obsidian etched with prayers, and they came not to kill Badu, but to bind him. They believed if his blood touched the soil during an eclipse, it would awaken Ubundwa, the fire god buried beneath the continent. Naima fought like a storm, arrows in the wind, blade in the dark. Badu? He held back. The god inside him begged to be released. But Badu remembered the womb of the god. He remembered the child Kenyoka had once been. So he fought like a man, not a monster. When the dust settled, only one foe remained. A tall figure in black and crimson robes, face covered in gold. She removed her mask. It was a woman. Imari, first flame of the order. Once a general under Badu's mother, Aziina. Now a traitor. You wear the serpent's skin well, she hissed. But you are still just a boy pretending to be king. You served my mother, Badu said. I served the throne, she corrected. Not the curse that sits on it now. They fought. Steel against rage. Divinity against duty. And in the final blow, Badu pinned his blade to her throat. But he didn't kill her. You still believe in something, he said. That's worth more than your death. He left her alive. And that decision would haunt him. That night, as they camped near the ruins of an old fortress, Naima asked the question Badu had been avoiding. Will you kill the sun priests? Badu stared at the flames. I don't want to kill anyone, he said, but I will burn down their lies. Because now he understood something deeper. The curse wasn't the serpent, it was the system. The ancient order that used fear to maintain control, branding children as monsters, rewriting history, hiding truth beneath ritual and fire. He wasn't here to reclaim a throne. He was here to destroy the lie it stood on. That night, Badu had a dream. He stood in a desert of ash. The sun above him melted the sky, and beneath his feet something moved. A voice echoed, not Kenyoka's, not his own, but deeper, older. Ubundwa, you carry my jailer's blood, and your veins are cracking. Suddenly, Badu saw his arms, golden cracks forming, light seeping from within. Ubundwa was waking, and Badu was the key. He awoke screaming, and the serpent inside him hissed in panic. The next day they arrived at the gates of Kaloma. Once a city of scholars, it was now wrapped in chains and fire. The sun priests had taken over. The people wore ash on their faces, eyes downcast. Badu walked through the streets, cloaked, silent. No one recognized him, except a little girl who looked up and whispered, Your eyes, they glow like hers. Hers? She nodded. Queen Aziina. Then she handed him a flower. One only found near the womb of the god. It should not have existed here, unless something from below had followed him. Badu and Naima hid in the ruins beneath the city, waiting for the eclipse. The sun priests were preparing a grand sacrifice. They didn't know the real vessel of the curse stood just beneath their feet. Naima turned to Badu. If you take the throne, they'll never follow you. Then I won't take it, he said. I'll break it. Because Badu had finally accepted the truth. He wasn't here to restore a kingdom. He was here to start something new. And in doing so, he would have to face gods, demons, and the fury of a world afraid of change. It was not the darkness that terrified them, but the truth it revealed. The city of Kaloma held its breath as the sky began to dim. The priests called it the Day of Reckoning. The people whispered another name, the day the sun would bleed. Above the city's grand ziggurat, the high flame circle gathered, robed in gold and crimson. They chanted in the forgotten tongue of flame, preparing the sacrifice they believed would ensure the world's survival. The victim? A boy, naked, terrified, with eyes like molten fire. He was not Badu, but he carried Badu's blood. Naima saw it first. "That's your brother." Badu's heart froze. "I don't have a brother," he whispered. "You do now." The boy's name was Tano. He was 12, half human, half something else. The priests had been hiding him for years, breeding him in secret. Born from one of the captured maidens once promised to the serpent god Kenyoka before Badu ended the bloodline ritual. Tano was a manufactured heir, a failsafe, a child born for sacrifice, a vessel bred to awaken Obundwa without risking Badu's life. They had planned this for years, centuries perhaps, because the sun priests never wanted to stop the god below. They wanted to control it, and Tano was their key. As the eclipse devoured the sky, Badu emerged from the ruins. He was cloaked in bone-white robes, painted with serpent symbols, holding a staff carved from the fang of the ancient Leviathan in the womb of the god. He walked openly through the city. People scattered. Soldiers raised their spears. But none dared strike, because in the dying light, his eyes glowed the exact hue of the sun's edge as it vanished. A living omen. A god returned. The drums stopped. The chanting died. And the high flame circle stared in disbelief. "He was supposed to be dead," one hissed. "He was never supposed to return," another whispered. But he had, and he brought the storm. The battle at the ziggurat. Naima loosed the first arrow. It pierced the throat of the flame watcher beside Tano. Then chaos erupted. Badu surged forward, a blur of serpent wrath and human precision. He didn't fight like a god. He fought like a storm disguised in flesh. Sun guards attacked in waves. He broke them with silence. Naima danced through the battlefield, twin daggers slicing through ritualists and zealots alike. The high flame circle tried to flee, but Badu's staff split the earth before them. "You don't get to run," he growled. "Not this time." As Badu reached the sacrificial platform, the eclipse reached its peak. The sky was black. The wind died. And from below the city, a pulse. Like a heartbeat. Obundwa was waking. Tano stared at Badu with tear-filled eyes. "Are you the monster they said you'd be?" Badu knelt beside him. "No," he whispered. "But they are." He cut the chains. But the moment the boy stood, light exploded from his chest. He wasn't just a vessel. He was a beacon. The blood of gods boiled in him. And Obundwa saw it. Above them, cracks formed in the eclipse. Not clouds. And through them came fire. Wings of flame. Eyes of endless heat. The flame-bound Obundwa's heralds descended upon Kaloma. The high flame circle rejoiced. They thought they had succeeded. But Obundwa hadn't come to serve them. He came to feed. The flame-bound didn't distinguish priest from rebel. They burned everything. Temples melted. Statues screamed. And the sun priests realized too late. Their god wasn't a savior. He was hunger. Imari, the commander Badu had once spared, arrived with her army, trying to stop the collapse. She saw the sky bleed. She saw Badu shielding the boy. And she saw her priests devoured by the flames they once worshipped. She made her choice. She switched sides. "I was wrong," she whispered to Badu. "The sun is not God. You are." Tano collapsed, light still leaking from his veins. "I'm not strong enough," he cried. Badu held him close. "You don't have to be." Then Badu did what he feared most. He let the serpent inside him speak. The god that was Kenyoka's rage. The divine inheritance he'd rejected for so long. He merged it with Tano's light. And together, the two brothers, one born of curse, the other of ritual, became balance. Obundwa rose half smoke, half volcano, with a voice like collapsing mountains. He reached for the brothers, but they stood firm. Tano channeled the light of the sun. Badu, the wisdom of the serpent. Together they forged a weapon of energy and memory, not a blade, a song of truth, of all who had died, all who had been silenced, all who had been sacrificed. And when that song echoed through the eclipse, even Obundwa faltered. He screamed, and the rift closed, not because the brothers killed him, but because they reminded him who had buried him in the first place. When the sky cleared, the city burned, but its people rose. The sun priests were no more, their temples broken, their truths shattered. Bata didn't take the throne, he gave it to the people. Tano, still recovering, stood beside him, and together they swore, no more gods in chains, no more lies in light, no more kings without questions. The sun returned, but now it no longer ruled, it simply rose. Sometimes the world doesn't break with thunder, it breaks in whispers. The city of Coloma stood on bones. Smoke still drifted through shattered alleys. Statues of the sun priests lay in ruin, their golden faces cracked like dried blood. Bata walked among the people with bare feet. He refused thrones, refused titles, refused worship. He said, "I have seen what power does to men who believe they are gods." But the people still followed him. They whispered his name like prayer. And in those whispers, danger began to grow. Tano, now 13, was no longer the frightened boy on the altar. The light within him had changed. He saw visions in his sleep. He spoke in voices that weren't his. And when he walked through the burned ruins of temples, plants grew from the ashes. They called him the second son. Some began building statues. Bata burned them. No idols, he warned. Not again. But each time Bata tried to keep the world simple, the world found a way to complicate itself. Commander Imari, scarred from the last battle but unbroken, met with Batu under the old tree of mourning. She wore no armor, only a robe of black silk. "I offer you a kingdom," she said. "The people want it. They need it. You can guide them." "I'm not a king," Bata replied. "Kings lie. I tell the truth." "But truth without structure is chaos," she said. "You have power. Use it or someone else will." He looked away, and in that silence, a seed of doubt took root. Naima vanished for 3 days. When she returned, her eyes were red. She had gone into the desert of the dead to find answers from the spirits of the old gods. What she brought back was a warning. "There is another," she said. Bata stiffened. "Another what?" "Another god. Or something worse. Something that used to be a god. It had awakened during the battle. Not Obundwa. Something older. It moved through shadows, through dust, through dreams. And it had already started whispering to Tano. That night, Tano woke screaming. He said he saw snakes made of stars. He said the moon had eyes. He said the wind called him the key. And when Bata found him, Tano's hands were glowing, burning, with glyphs Bata didn't recognize. Ancient markings from before the sun, before the serpent, before memory. And written in the center of his chest was a name. Ngaru. Ngaru was a god not born from worship. It was born from absence. A god of what people forgot. A god of silence, dust, and things buried in time. When Obundwa was sealed beneath the earth, Ngaru was sealed behind reality itself. Now the breach in the sky had weakened the veil. And Tano was the bridge. Because of his blood. Because of his light. Because of his need to belong. Bata took Naima and Tano on a journey deep into the southlands of Ash, beyond the bone valleys, to a ruin even the flame priests had avoided. There, in a temple shaped like a dying mouth, they found it, the sarcophagus of the first silence, sealed with 7 locks, covered in mirrors made of black stone. And as Tano stepped close, the locks shattered, because they recognized his blood, because Ngaru was already inside him. In the dead temple, with walls breathing like lungs, Tano collapsed. Bata caught him. But it wasn't Tano's voice that spoke next. It came from everywhere. And nowhere. He is tired of being small. He wants to matter. You made him second. Let me make him first. Bada trembled. He had killed gods. He had silenced priests. But this voice, it made him feel forgotten. As the voice of Ngaru tried to take Tano, Naima pulled out a mirror blade she had stolen from the temple. She slashed her palm and drew a sigil in blood on the floor. Then she stepped into the void. You want a host? She said. Take me. The voice paused, but then laughed. You are brave, it whispered, but not enough. And the temple began to collapse. Bada grabbed Tano. Naima screamed at them to run. The floor turned to ash, the ceiling to screams. They escaped moments before the temple vanished in a pulse of black fire. But behind them Ngaru was free. Not in a body. Not yet. But moving like dust across the continent. Feeding on forgotten names, buried pain, and silence between brothers. And worst of all, Tano was still hearing him. Back in Coloma, things changed. Tano became distant. He spoke less. But his eyes glowed more. The people began calling him the voice between suns. Bada tried to stop the worship. But Tano didn't refuse it. He seemed to need it. And one night, Bada caught him staring at the moon, smiling, as if someone or something was speaking back. The hardest wars are not fought with swords, but with the people we love. Coloma was no longer the city Bada had bled for. Where once there was rebuilding, now there was ritual. Where once there were survivors, now there were followers. And where once there was hope, now stood Tano's temple, built of moonstone, with silver flames, with eyes carved into every wall. The boy prophet was now called the voice between suns. And Bada was called nothing. He had become a ghost in his own legend. Naima returned from the Eastlands, burned and half-blind but alive. She carried a scroll stolen from the ruins of the first flame monastery. It spoke of Ngaru's final form. He cannot exist fully in this world, unless born through a willing heart. The final vessel must choose him, must love him. Tano had not been possessed. He had been convinced. And now, he was preparing for the final ritual under the blood eclipse. On the day the moon bled, the people of Coloma gathered around the temple in silence. Tano stood above them, arms outstretched, his voice filled with ancient words no mortal should have known. Behind him, a portal began to open, not to another place, but to unbeing, to the space between memory and nothingness, to the realm of Ngaru. And from it came whispers, so many whispers, each one a forgotten truth, each one a buried pain. Bada climbed the temple steps, alone. He carried no weapon, only a flute, his mother's flute, the same one he had once played to calm Tano in the cage. He played now, one final song, a lullaby from their childhood. And for a moment, Tano hesitated. His hands trembled, his voice cracked, the portal flickered, the whispers paused. But then, a new voice spoke from the sky. He sings because he fears your truth. He binds you in weakness. Become what he never let you be. Tano turned to Bada, and in his eyes was a storm of love and betrayal. Bada stepped forward, tears in his eyes. No anger, only sorrow. You are my brother, he said, and I would die for you. He handed Tano the flute. But I will not let the world burn for your pain. Tano raised his hand. The air shimmered with power. All of Coloma watched. Time slowed. And in that pause, Tano saw something. Not Bada's strength, but his mercy. And Tano remembered the songs, the stories, the way Bada never left him behind. And the spell broke. The portal screamed. The sky cracked. The whispers screeched in rage. Tano turned and thrust the flute into the rift. And as music met void, Ngaru screamed. The god of silence finally silenced. The temple exploded in light. Statues shattered. The sky healed. And Tano collapsed. Bada carried his brother's body down the steps. He was still breathing. but barely. The people fell to their knees, not in worship but in mourning. The age of gods was ending, not with thunder, but with memory. Years passed. Tano never regained his full strength, but he laughed again. He played the flute again, and he planted gardens where temples used to stand. Bada built no city. He wandered. He told stories. He listened. And everywhere he went, people asked the same question. Are the gods truly gone? To which he always replied, no. As long as we remember them, they're watching. Not from above, but from within us. Now, dear listener, let me tell you why this story matters. This isn't just a tale about gods and monsters. It's a story about brothers. About how love can wound deeper than war. How even the kindest souls can be tempted by power when they felt invisible too long. Tano was never evil. He was forgotten. And forgetting is the first step toward destruction. And Badu? He wasn't a hero because he fought. He was a hero because he chose forgiveness over fire. The gods in this story, the serpent, the flame, the silence, they are all parts of us. But so is the choice. And that's the lesson. The real war is not between light and darkness, but between memory and forgetfulness. If this story moved you even a little, then don't let it fade. Share this tale. Tell someone who needs it. Subscribe to the channel for more forgotten myths reborn. And remember, as long as we carry this story forward, the world will never go silent.